Hello, and thank you for joining today's webinar. We are ready to begin. Today's webinar is eligible for 1 contact hour. Sigma Theta Tau International Honor Society of Nursing is accredited as a provider of nursing continuing professional development by the American Nurses Credentialing Centers Commission on Accreditation. The speaker and planning committee members have disclosed no conflicts of interest. To receive contact hours for this CPD session, participants are required to attend the webcast and complete the evaluation form, which will be emailed to all attendees. This webinar is being recorded and will be available via the Sigma website for members at a future date. Following the presentation, we will have time for a questions and answer session. You'll see on the GoToWebinar control panel that you can send a message through the questions feature. This is where you can type in any question you'd like to pose to the presenters. Be sure to hit send so that the message makes it to us. On behalf of Sigma, we would like to thank our speaker for sharing her expertise with us today. Our speaker is Stacy Mathia. Stacy is the clinical nurse manager for USA-based international nurse recruiting company, Interstaff Incorporated. She reviews more than 40 international nurse resumes a week and interviews nurses from all over the world. Prior to her position with Interstaff, Stacy was a hospital nurse manager, so she knows what recruiters and hospitals are looking for in a successful application. Stacy is also the Indiana State President of the Emergency Nurses Association. Now, let's go ahead and turn our presentation over to our speaker.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Like Megan said, my name is Stacy Maitha, and I'm excited to be talking with you today about how to successfully write a resume so that you can get the nurse position that you are wanting. So our learning objectives for this presentation this afternoon are one, that you demonstrate the importance of a well-written resume in your pursuit of a nurse position, and that you recognize and correct common mistakes in resume writing, and that you understand how to utilize available local and online resources to produce a successful resume. So a great resume, often I feel like, is something that we take for granted. A great resume, though, is really the key to opening the door to get you an interview for the job that you want. Your resume is the first impression that any hiring manager or human resources representative is going to have. That first impression can determine whether or not you move on to the next step of the application process, which is the interview, where you really get to shine and show what kind of nurse you are and what you have to offer to the company. Your resume can automatically disqualify you from moving forward at all. Human resources and other recruiting type positions will screen out unqualified applicants based on poorly produced resumes. And your resume sets you apart from the rest of the applicants. Once your resume lands on the desk of a hiring manager, that is when you really have the opportunity to make an impression on your future boss. Keys to a successful resume include the appearance of the resume, the content of the resume, and the details of the resume. On the right side of this slide, you'll see a very brief snippet of a resume, or at least it should be a very brief snippet of a resume. However, for this resume, that's 1 page. As you can see, this resume has giant font and only has about 3 paragraphs worth of information on this single page. So we're going to talk about some of the other mistakes that are visible here on this resume. For instance, you'll notice there is no punctuation. It's all just kind of thrown together. The grammar is incorrect. There are spelling mistakes. So we're going to talk through how to make sure you don't hand in a resume that looks like this. Your resume is what you're going to use to distinguish yourself from other nurses. So you are going to use this opportunity to really set yourself apart. This is your chance to highlight volunteer work, memberships in your professional organization, other courses that you've taken that are relevant or revealing about you, and any awards or recognition that you've received throughout your time in nursing school or in other positions that you may have held. The appearance of your resume is as important as the content of your resume. It is very important that your resume be simple and clean. Don't try to add lots of graphics or fancy borders. Make sure that your color of your resume is just black text. Your font and your font size are important. It's important to choose a font that is professional. Things like Comic Sans or other kind of stylized scripts or fonts are not necessary. Your font size should be appropriate. Usually something like 11 or 12 is the most appropriate font size to use. You also want to make sure that it's consistent. So as you're formatting your resume, you don't want to have a size 16 header and a size 10 text on one section and then have something else where you have a size 10 header and a size 16 in your body. So make sure that there's consistency in the font that you're using and in the font size that you're using. The other thing that I see a lot on resumes is that people will use templates, and templates are great. They can really help you decide, what sections that you want to have on your resume, or remind you that you're missing something, or help you with margins, things like that. Templates are fine, but if you're going to use a template, make sure that you delete the parts you're not using. You do not want to turn a resume in that has garbled up, fake text in different sections of your resume. You also don't want it to say template, resume template. You don't want it to have fill in blank here still on your resume when you turn it in. So make sure that if you're going to use a template that you fill in all of those parts and complete everything so that the person who's reviewing your resume knows that it is doesn't recognize that it's a template that's being used. So let's talk about your resume introduction. Excuse me. So of course, you need to put your name on your resume. And like I mentioned, you don't want to have a bunch of stylized fonts, and you want to make sure that it's bold and that it is something that's legible. You also want to make sure to include your credentials, and it's important that you look at how you list your credentials. There's some guidance out there on the internet, but typically you're going to put your highest nursing degree immediately following your name, and then your license. And if you have certifications, then they would follow after that. So it's important to put your name and your credentials at the top of your resume. And then you want to follow that with your contact information. And I know it should go without saying, but please make sure that your contact information is current. Make sure that if you are applying for a job internationally, that you include a country code so that your hiring manager or recruiter can get a hold of you easily. It's also beneficial if you're applying internationally for a job that you put a time zone. It's important that you use your address and include your city and country, and that you include an email where they can reach you. The summary or objective is a kind of hotly debated part of a resume. It really depends on the job that you're applying for, whether or not that's something you need to put on your resume. The summary or objective is an opportunity for you to briefly state what kind of position that you're looking for and why you are the most qualified for it. But it can also get you into trouble if it's something that you don't write well, and it is something that really needs to be thought out before you use it. Um, I would recommend, if you're going to write a summary or objective, that you make sure it's tailored to the position that you're preparing the resume for. So don't just have a generic, I want to be a nurse in a hospital that can use my skills to the best of my ability. Those kind of generic summaries or objectives are really not beneficial. So it's better, if you're going to write one, that you make sure that it's been tailored to the position that you're looking at. The content of your resume is what we're going to talk about for the next few slides, because it's obviously what we all think of as the most important. So your education is usually what's going to go at the top. That's going to come right after your introduction. With your education, you need to make sure that you include all of this information, because most employers, most human resources representatives are going to be looking at this information to be able to validate your education information. So you'll need to have the year that you graduated, what degree you attained, the school name, the city or country where you obtained your degree, and then this is an opportunity for you to include any special awards or recognitions or committees. You do not need to list primary or secondary school information on your nursing resume. Most resumes need to be a maximum of 2 pages long, and you really need the space to highlight other things. It goes without saying that if you have achieved a diploma or a bachelor's degree in nursing, that you already have successfully graduated from primary and secondary school, and the scores that you got on any graduating tests from those schools are not necessary for your resume. This is, though, an opportunity for you to list things if you graduated with honors from your nursing school, if you were recognized for something special that you did, if you were a Student Nurse Association president or something of that nature. This would be an opportunity to put one bullet point underneath your education and mention that that was something that you accomplished. The next is work history. And I will tell you, from my experience in hiring and also in recruiting, I personally think that work history should be chronological. It is the most easy to follow, and if I'm reviewing a lot of applications, it is the one that makes the most sense to me. There is some guidance out there that you can build your work history in a more skills focused way or experience focused way, so that you are highlighting something that is more unique to you. And that's probably okay for certain positions as you get into like leadership positions or education or something like that. And it's really more suited for a CV and not so much a resume. With a resume, you really should stick with chronological work history. Excuse me. So you're going to include both your nursing experience and your non-nursing experience. And it's important to do that because if this resume is something that's going to be used for an employer to verify your work history compared to, let's say, a criminal background check, it's going to be important for you to list out all of the places where you have worked so that they can do that. The other thing that they might use it for is verifying any employment gaps, and they'll want you to explain those employment gaps. Some hospitals are very particular and want anything more than a 30-day gap in employment to be explained. So you'll want to talk with a recruiter and see if that's something that they need from you. Your non-nursing experience, even though it may not feel relevant to you as you're applying for nurse positions, it can say a lot about who you are in terms of your work ethic, in terms of your longevity as you're working. And so it's important to go ahead and include those things as well. It also gives you an opportunity to highlight if you've done some professional development, if you advanced from an entry-level position to a management position or something like that. And those can all contribute to a hiring manager's decision to give you an opportunity at an interview. When you're listing out your work history, you need to make sure that you have the start and end date, both a month and the year. And it's important to be consistent. So I recommend that you keep that information, that you track that information in some way. That way, anytime you're filling out an application or creating a resume, customizing a resume for another position, that you're consistent when you're giving that information. Even if you were to make a mistake, sometimes employers, if they notice those mistakes, they'll think it's intentional, and you want to make sure that you appear to know what your employment history is with accuracy. You want to list the position that you held, and for many of you, if this is your first nurse position, it's okay to say student nurse. If this truly is your first job, you can put student nurse if you're including some kind of information like that. This would be another opportunity if this is your very first job and all you have is volunteer experience in the past. You could also list that here, and you could list that it was a volunteer position. Definitely need to include the facility name, the city or country that you were in, and then your duties and accomplishments. This should not be a laundry list of duties. You do not need to list things that are obvious to your job. So for example, on an entry-level nurse position, let's say maybe you've worked in a nurse position one time before and you're trying to move to a different hospital. You do not need to list that as a nurse you were assessing patients. That's a given. You don't need to list that as a nurse you were providing patient education. That's a given. So these are the kinds of things that you want to highlight that you did well. So accomplishments, those are, I was a member of the employee, excuse me, of the employee shared governance committee, or we other accomplishments like clinical accomplishments that you were a part of. If you were part of some kind of an evidence-based practice improvement project, this would be a place to list that. So it shouldn't be a laundry list of everything you've ever done as a nurse, because we all know what basic nurse functions are. So you don't need to list all of those out on your duties. It's also a good place for you to list if you did things like charge nursing or precepting or coaching for new nurses. This would be a place to list that as well. So, extras. Really, I list these as extras because they're all really good things to have on your resume, but it also is going to depend on how long your resume is. So, if your resume is going more than 2 pages long, you can pretty much rest assured that the rest of the information on page 3, 4, and however many more pages you've added is not going to be seen. If you're applying for a position in an upper level management or leadership or educator position or something like that, the hiring manager or recruiter is going to expect to see lots of details and information in a CV. For your resume, these hiring managers and recruiters are looking at dozens of resumes and trying to weed out applications that are not qualified. So they are not going to look past most of the time, page 1. Sometimes you'll get them to page 2. So if you have room on the front page of your resume, this is the kind of information that you should consider listing. So if you have growth and development kinds of things that you have participated in, this is an opportunity to list that. So I had an opportunity to be a preceptor for new nurses, or I was the go-to person to mentor nursing students who came on the unit, things like that. Skills, again, listing skills is a good idea. Listing skills that everyone has or that everyone in nursing is expected to have is not necessary. So you do not need to list that you're a good team player. That's an expected skill for all nurses. You do not need to list that you know how to make a bed. That's an expected skill for all nurses. However, if you have a skill in ultrasound guided IV, that is a good thing to list here. Those kinds of extra skills that you have is what you want to highlight on your resume. EMR experience is also something you can highlight. If you have experience from nursing school in Cerner, put that on here. If you have Epic or whatever EMR you have experience in, go ahead and put that on here. You don't need to just list that you have computer skills. That's expected. Everyone who is doing nursing in 2021 is expected to know how to use a computer and to document in a computer. So you don't have to list that. Courses that are relevant or revealing. And what I mean by that is if you have taken a course that is relevant to the position that you're applying for, you should list it. For instance, if you're already BLS certified or ACLS certified, go ahead and list that on there. List the date that you got certified and the date that it expires. If you've taken an advanced trauma course for nurses, put that on there. TNCC, ENPC, any of those kinds of courses, you would want to list those if they're relevant to the position you're applying for. And revealing courses would be other things that you have interest in. So let's say that you're applying for a med-surg nurse position, and you've also taken a course in some kind of professional development for nurses. Go ahead and put that on there. It may not have anything to do with the actual position of being a med-surg nurse at that moment, but it reveals a lot about you if you are developing yourself and taking courses and things that are helping you to grow professionally, and a nurse hiring manager is going to recognize and notice that about you. Licenses. So if you are licensed in more than the state where you are applying for a position, you can list those licenses. If you are applying for an out-of-state position or if you're applying internationally, you definitely want to list any licenses that you hold as a nurse. Or if you have other licenses such as a paramedic license or something like that, this would be a place to list those as well. And then languages. So if you have space on your resume, it is a good idea to go ahead and list whatever languages that you are fluent in. Don't list languages that you can just greet people in. So not something where you're just socially conversant, but you need to be clinically fluent in that language in order to list it on your resume. So I'm just going to share a few poor examples of content that have come across my desk as I review resumes, and then we'll talk about why these are poor examples of content. So I reviewed a resume recently where under their duties, someone had listed that they were a bathroom monitor at secondary school. This kind of information There's a couple of problems with it. I am imagining that the person listed it because they wanted to demonstrate that they were recognized as being someone who was responsible during secondary school. This was a first time nurse position, I should say. So they didn't have a lot of information to share about previous work experience. There wasn't much on there from previous jobs or anything like that. So I think that they were trying to build out their resume and to demonstrate um, some some qualities that they thought would be beneficial. However, this kind of information should not be on a resume. One, anything that you did prior to college or university, unless it really has led to your development as a nurse in some way, really doesn't need to be on your professional nurse resume. And then, of course, while it is admirable that, this person was able to attain a position of responsibility at school, bathroom monitor is just not appropriate for a resume. So just pay attention to the wording and to the things that you're putting on your resume. Um, it's just important to make sure that you are coming across as someone who is professional and ready for the position that you're about to interview for. Um, I also highly recommend not writing that you resign to avoid working for a rude manager. For one, you really shouldn't have listed on your resume any of the reasons that you left a position. Um, Sometimes when you're filling out an application, there will be a spot for reasons for leaving a position, and you can certainly come up with ways of stating why you left a position that are um, a little more um, a little more. I don't know why I can't think of a word. A little more, uh, or a little less, let's say that, a little less accusatory. You don't want to come across as rude yourself or disrespectful. You want to make sure that whatever you're writing as a reason for leaving on your resume or on your application, that you're being respectful of your previous employer. However, it shouldn't be on your resume at all. So um, don't write why you're leaving a job. And then, of course, you don't ever want to say bad things about a previous leader or a manager during an application, during your resume, or during an interview. So make sure that you have come up with a um, some kind of a way that is going to make it sound as if you grew from that experience, as opposed to making it sound like you left bitter and resentfully. Um, this last sentence, I used my own name, but I see things like this all the time on resumes. Um, so this is something that you um, should not write, and we'll go over this a little bit more. My name is Stacy, and I want to be a nurse to care for people, but I cannot stand for more than 2 hours. So there's a lot wrong with that sentence. This is an objective that I saw on a resume, and I see variations of it fairly frequently. So one, it's not a useful objective. It's a waste of space on a resume to say that you want to care for people as a nurse. We all know that. And so the other problem is you don't want to talk about your physical um, limitations in a resume in this way. If you're looking for a particular type of position, perhaps you're looking for more of an administrative or telehealth or something like that. Then you need to be looking at the job that you're applying for. But to put this kind of a sentence in your objective is not going to come across well to a hiring manager. So just watch for those. And then, of course, the other problem with this sentence is there's no punctuation, there's no capitalization, and it's a run-on sentence. Details of your resume. So these are things that we often don't think enough about. I think punctuation and grammar are two things that are much more important than people think about. This punctuation and grammar are not only important in your resume, they're also important in your application. So if you're filling out a computerized application, even there, you should be paying attention to punctuation and grammar. You should always have proper capitalization for names, for titles, for schools, for geography. You always want to make sure that you have appropriate punctuation and grammar. There's a couple of reasons that that's important. For myself as a hiring manager, when I see someone present a resume who has poor punctuation and grammar, I automatically think that they are careless. It really portrays a sense of laziness, a sense of not caring about the resume, about the impression that it is giving. And it is really the first impression. If you hand me a piece of paper that has lots of bad punctuation and grammar, misspelled words, I'm going to automatically assume that you didn't have time to spell check. And everyone can spell check. So those are really important things to pay attention to. Missing information. So if you hand me a resume and you don't, in your, let's say on your education section, that you list your school name, but you don't bother to list what your degree was, or you don't bother to list your year that you graduated, I'm either going to question your the details of your education, or again, I'm going to think that you're careless. So missing information can really give the wrong impression. And so you want to make sure that you have all of your dates listed, all of your positions listed. I will say too, the other thing about missing information is if you apply for a position with a company, don't get that position, and then let's say you apply for another position, or the same position opens up in a year or two or something like that, and you apply with a different resume and your information is different, that again can prevent you from moving forward in the application process. So it's really important that you're being consistent, and that you're providing all of the information about your work history. Too much information. So we've talked about that a little bit already with some of the things not to list, do a laundry list of duties. You don't want to put lots of personal information in here. So let's say if you're describing or explaining an employment gap, you don't want to put a lot of personal things in there. An example of that would be I've had a resume come across my desk where a nurse listed an employment gap because she had some medical issues, and she was very explicit in those medical issues. That is not appropriate for a resume. So just make sure that you're not providing too much information about your personal life on your resume. Demographics. This one is a little bit tricky. So, in the US, we are by law not allowed to talk about things that could potentially lead to discrimination. So religion, age, race, family dynamics, things like that. We are not allowed to talk about those during the job application process. So we do not put them on our resumes. I know that there is some difference in other countries with the way that that information is shared on resumes. So really do your research, do some online research, and look at resumes for the position and what country you're applying in, and see what information is expected to be listed with your demographics, because that can definitely affect that can definitely affect the impression that you are giving to your hiring manager. And so just do some research before you put any of that information on your resume. And then it is really important that you customize your resume. I know it's, especially if you're applying for, 8 to 10 to 12, sometimes more positions as you're getting started in your nursing career. It's easy to just have one resume and just kind of stick it out there and attach it to every application that you are submitting, but I would really encourage you to customize your resume. So you want to research your potential employer and make sure that as you are preparing your resume, that you are keeping in mind who it is that you're applying for. And again, that goes back to the summary and objective as well. So that's a good place to demonstrate that you know who it is you're applying with. Um, and you want it to fit their expectations. So if you're applying for, if this is your first nursing position and you're applying for a med surg position, you want to highlight the kind of skills that they would be expecting a med surg nurse to have. So you want to customize that to fit their expectations. And then this is just a really small detail, but something that I think is important. You want to pay attention to the file name that you save your resume under. Make sure that it has your full name and make sure that it does not have another employer's name in the file name. So seems kind of silly, but it's something that you want to pay attention to. So for resume review, you are probably going to spend a lot of time on your resume. And as you know, as you spend more time reading a document over and over again, the more likely it is that you are not going to see things. You're not going to notice the period you forgot or the capitalization that you missed. You're not going to notice the year that you left off of some employment experience. So have someone with fresh eyes look it over for you. And just let them go to town pointing out things that they think sound wrong or look funny or things that you've missed. Because once you've got that basic resume down and that you're just tweaking for each employer, you don't want to be putting out some mistakes everywhere you have applied. It's also a good idea to find a reviewer with qualifications. Do you have a teacher from nursing school that would be willing to look at it for you? A friend who's a manager, maybe you know someone who's in human resources. See if you can get someone with a little bit of experience to look at it with you or for you. If you are preparing a resume in a language that is not your first language, try and have someone whose language it is their first language to review it for you if possible. I know it's not always possible, but if you can, it can be really beneficial to have someone look at the language for you. Professional association membership, I listed this on here because it's actually a really good place to find nurse mentors who will review resumes for you for free. So take advantage of your professional association membership and check out their mentor programs, because this is a really good way to get that kind of a service, and you will have lots and lots of guidance, and it's a great benefit. And then of course, there certainly are pay for service companies. I don't have any in particular that I would endorse, but they are out there. Lots of nurses who kind of do it as a side gig to review resumes. If you are if you're trying to make some kind of big move, it might be worth considering doing something like that. But usually you'll be able to come up with local resources, people within your own circle of influence and sphere of networking who can help you review your resume and really get it polished up without having to pay for anything. So I would recommend doing that. So, like I said in the beginning, your resume really is the key to opening the door. Your resume is what gets you an interview. Once you get in front of that interviewer, you are going to rock it. I am sure that you are going to make a great impression, but your resume is that first impression, and it really can unlock or lock a door for you. And again, it's an impression that actually stays with them. So if you ever apply for a position with the same company in the future, it's really important that you've had consistency and that you've continued to make the same great impression every time you've applied for your dream job. So use your resume to open a new door to your nursing career and be ready for those interviews to start rolling in. So thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Megan?
Yes, so we have time. If anyone has any questions, feel free to type that into the questions feature, and we can take questions from you if you have anything specifically related to the topic. So we'll give people just a minute here. Okay, so our first question. If you want a job through your preceptorship, who do you show your resume to, or do you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And absolutely you do. I would actually show it to two people. I would show it to your um, whoever your mentor is and during your preceptorship, so your preceptor. And then I would ask them if they are willing to pass it on to the hiring manager or if they're willing to introduce you to the hiring manager or director of the department, whoever it is that's doing the hiring. But yeah, it's completely appropriate to hand your resume over in that situation.
Okay. Another question. If you have worked in a person's downline and they are very familiar with your work, how would you sell yourself?
Well, first I would say, also a really great question. First I would say is hopefully you've been selling yourself the whole time you've been in their downline. We like to say that you you really are on an interview the entire time that you're working in any of the supporting or ancillary roles in a hospital department. So hopefully you've been interviewing well while you've been working in that person's downline. Um, and then the other thing that you can do is just sit down and have a conversation with them, especially if it's, if you're a few months out from graduation, sit down with them and just say, hey, I plan on applying for a position with you as soon as I graduate. Are there things that you see I have an opportunity to improve? Um, and even if there's not, and even if there probably aren't things, if you feel like you're the stellar employee, it's still good to do because they will see that as you seeking growth from them, looking to them for guidance and that you are willing to learn and take on new challenges. So, try to have a conversation with them if you can, a few months before you graduate if you're planning to stay in that department.
Okay, next question. I know you said we shouldn't add things into description that is expected of nurses. Should we be explaining some of the tasks we did under our clinical experiences?
Um, so no, probably not. And the reason is everyone has essentially the same clinical experiences. If you did something particularly extraordinary, you certainly can mention that. but I would say it's probably, it's not going to be something that your hiring manager is going to pay much attention to. Their eyes are just going to skim over any of those kinds of expected things. So use the space that you have on your paper to highlight things that you did that were out of the ordinary.
Okay, next question. Do you have any advice for someone coming from the active military side seeking employment on the civilian side? Our resume system is very different from more traditional styles. What should we mention and what should we leave out?
Yeah. So I think that you'll probably have, I mean, if you're moving from military to civilian, obviously you're going to need to customize. Your resume isn't, you can't use the same format. It's not going to make sense to someone who isn't familiar with military um, positions. So as you're customizing, I would just try to follow as much of a standard format as you can. Um, look at some of the templates online, but I would say, gosh, I really love hiring folks with a military background because usually their resumes are beautiful. So just you know use your experience in terms of attention to detail, and I think that's what I expect from someone with a military background is there's a really great attention to detail. I expect that there's going to be some opportunity for you to highlight some positions of leadership, and your resume is um, a reflection of who you are and your experience. And I think that you have an opportunity to, um, just to really show what kind of qualities that you have to offer a department in terms of training nurses, and any of the extra skills that you may have to highlight that a civilian nurse hasn't maybe had experience with.
Okay. If you want to work in a specialty such as pediatrics, do you or should you or could you take extra classes to qualify prior to graduation or passing the NCLEX?
Um, so yes and no. Both. So it's really going to depend on what those classes are, but I do think that it's worth trying. So getting into those specialty areas like pediatrics can be NICU is another good one. Can be really difficult to do without a year of real on the job nursing experience. But I do think that even if you don't get into that area on your first try, it is still going to benefit you even after you've had the year of med surge or whatever that hospital requires before you can move to a specialty area. It's still going to benefit you to have taken those courses. It's still going to look good on your resume. Your hiring manager is still going to take that into consideration. So I would still say yes, take them. But I would also tell you, I would caution you, taking courses prior to NCLEX often are not considered certifying courses. So, you can audit lots of things before you become a nurse, but you may not get credit for it or get certified for it until after you've become a registered nurse. So just be careful and pay attention so that you're actually getting the full benefit of the course prior to becoming a registered nurse.
Should we list our clinical experiences in chronological order from first semester to last, or from most recent clinical to least recent?
Um, if you have if you have work experience that you are putting on your resume, you do not need to list your clinical experience. You can list clinical highlights, but nursing programs are pretty much the same, regardless of where you are in the world, especially if it's a bachelor's of science in nursing, and your clinical experience listed out chronologically or otherwise is not necessary. You can highlight things that you think are exceptional or important to the position that you're applying for. Um, but you do not need to list out every clinical experience that you had on your resume.
All right. Well, thank you so much to our presenter for all of this great information. Sigma is grateful that you took the time to share with this audience, and we look forward to hearing more from you in the future. Be sure to check out Sigma's upcoming webinars, podcasts, and resources to support you and your colleagues at sigmanursing.org. Also, previously recorded webinars and podcasts are freely available on the Sigma repository. Thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful day.